Our guest speaker for today is Lynn Gendusa, and I saw Lynn speak at a Georgia Vietnam Veterans Alliance meeting last month, and she gave just a wonderful speech. Um, I'm going to read a little bit about her background, just so as you know. After 43 years as an interior designer in Atlanta, uh, Lynn retired and picked up a pen, as she says, and she began writing daily newspaper columns for her hometown newspaper, which was in LaGrange, Georgia. And as other newspapers saw this, her client list, I guess for lack of a better term, of newspapers has expanded to include the Marietta Daily Journal and the Rome News Tribune, and she's had articles appear in USA Today. She's written a couple of books. One is called It's All Right with Me, and she's writing a second one called Southern Comfort. She continues to write weekly columns to inspire folks never to give up, never to give in, unite, love, and appreciate each other and God. Lynn currently resides in Roswell, Georgia with her husband, David. She is the mother of three grown children, two stepchildren, and four grandchildren. So let's give a round of applause for Lynn Gendusa.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very humbled and honored by your invitation. Um, I, I'm just little old me. I've never served in the military and I have never been to Vietnam. However, I wrote a Memorial Day story and I did my research on it, and it received many responses, and it traveled across the country, and I'm so glad it did. And that is why I'm here today. I don't know if any of you read it in your local papers or in other papers throughout, but I'm going to begin by reading it so that you will know what we're talking about here today. It's called the Salute the Vietnam Warriors. And then when I finish, I'll tell you a little bit about how it came to be. While thumbing through my old high school yearbooks one day, tears pooled in my eyes. Yes, they were all there. Young men with hope in their eyes and their youth on the edge of disappearing. I wondered what they would have accomplished in their lives if they had the promise of a future. Would they have laughed as I do at the silly antics of a grandchild? Would they still possess the impish grins the camera caught in the 60s? Maybe Howard would have made it onto the big screen with his good looks. Perhaps Bobby would be a renowned physician today, and Larry might have climbed the ranks in his beloved army before retiring to Florida. However, the maybes left when they boarded a military bus and headed off to serve our nation while the war escalated in Vietnam. They, like so many, returned only to be laid to rest in their hometown cemeteries, laid to rest before they had a chance to see what could have been. These young men joined the service, as so many do, to become soldiers of war. They were the elite among us who I believe God anointed with an extra dose of courage. They went bravely into battle to defend the land they loved. They steadfastly looked out for each other and often gave their lives to save their comrades. The Vietnam warriors were no different in character and honor from those who bravely fought for our independence. They held the same gritty spirit as those who battled before them in the Revolutionary War or World War I's and II. But the warriors of Vietnam did differ from the soldiers in previous wars. These soldiers who returned from Vietnam bore a scar. By the time our troops were pulled from Vietnam in 1975, over 52,000 young soldiers had perished. Between 1964 and 1975, 2,709,918 men and women wore an American military uniform in Vietnam. 261 of them were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, as Bobby Ray was for saving many lives except his own. Of those killed in combat, 61% were younger than 21, just out of school, just beginning to dream, just starting a future. Also, in 1975, America's electorate was deeply divided. Some say the military was demoralized. For those who returned from the rice paddies and trenches, from the ships in the skies and the prisons in Vietnam, there were no homecoming parades or bands of screaming happy folks in Times Square to greet them. Vietnam was simply over for America. Today, these fallen soldiers are immortalized on a wall in Washington, D.C. For those with friends or loved ones whose names are etched in this wall, the war is not forgotten, nor is the sacrifice. We are the older generation now, looking back at the young, innocent faces in our yearbooks. Our faces bear the lines that attest to the joys and sorrows of living long. Their faces remain ageless. Today, 610,000 courageous Vietnam veterans are still walking among us. Of those who risked their lives in Southeast Asia, 97% were honorably discharged, even though many were drafted for service. Even after countless acts of heroism and bravery shown by our American troops during the second longest war in our history, they returned home to be treated harshly by many for just doing what they were asked to do. Unfortunately, this response caused much grief and created a loss of self-esteem for many young soldiers, and it led to deep-seated problems. Our worst divisive behavior is the scar of Vietnam. The wound was not caused by the soldiers. The injury was inflicted by the free citizens who remained on American soil that turned their anger toward those sent to battle. We can fairly charge those in government and politics for almost anything, but we ought not charge the bravest, the best, and the finest among us. We should never blame the warriors, the ones who suffer and give the most, nor the 150,000 who were wounded in Vietnam, nor the prisoners of war, nor those missing in action. I look into the eyes of the framed Vietnamese doll my brother sent me in 1965. She has my POW MIA bracelet around her waist to remind me of another pilot whose remains were finally located a few years ago. My brother lived until 1998, but his time spent in Vietnam was always fresh in his heart. I too vow to honor those who gave so much and received so little. Memorial Days will come and go, but this year let's stop for a moment and remember the brave soldiers of yesterday who gave up their tomorrows so we could live today. Let's celebrate their short lives. Maybe it will help heal the scar a divided nation caused and remind us to never produce such a wound again. At the end of the story, I wrote a quote. I'm going to save that quote for just a moment, and I'll read it in just a few minutes. You know, I have been a weekly columnist for 6 years for various newspapers in Georgia. I am also a regular contributor to the USA Today network throughout the country. I have written over 300 columns, but I call this story The Little Engine That Could. And I wondered why there were so many responses to this story and so many publications. And I began to ponder, is it the wounds of this war that have just not quite healed? Have we buried this war into our souls to where it's almost forgotten? Do our former soldiers feel isolated and feel like they cannot tell their stories to anyone other than to each other because America wants to forget it? Or is it all of the above? And so I thought about this, and let me tell you how this started. Each week when I go upstairs to write my column, I sit down at my desk, and it's a little cubbyhole, actually, a dormer window in a huge bonus room upstairs. Have a desk, and my house is clean, but trust me, the rest of that office is not. It is a mess, and it stays cluttered most all of the time. And there's a little cubbyhole behind me. There's a window, and then there's a little cubbyhole, and then the cubbyhole is unfinished. And you can find everything from files, ribbons, and bugs in there. I mean, it is just a lost world. So I always go upstairs, and when I sit at my desk and look at my computer, I'll say, okay, God, what are we writing about today? And sometimes the stories come pretty fast, and sometimes they come slow. And particularly during when you have to write a column for holidays, whether it be Christmas or Valentine's or whatever day that it is, it's as if you have to get that in early, and you have to think about, did I write about that before, or is this something I can write about again? And so they're a little bit difficult to write, and especially Veterans Day and Memorial Day, because you're trying to say something so important and it has to be so exact, and you want to make sure you get it right. And also, if you're going to send that story into a major publication like the USA Today, there's a lot of competition for other writers who want to make the headlines with their holiday stories or their Memorial or Veterans Day story. So I knew it was raining one day, and I decided to go upstairs and start writing it a little bit early to get it into the Nashville Tennessean, where my editor there is the one that puts it out into the network. And so I go upstairs and I go, okay, God, it's raining outside. I guess you're in the closet today. Will you please help me write this story? And I didn't get anything. I'm looking at a blank computer and I'm going, oh dear. I said, okay, we have a deadline. Come on, don't let me get a writer's block here today. And as I was sitting there, I'm looking for something to do, and I'm looking around, and I saw 2 yearbooks on the floor. And I had brought them out earlier in the week because a friend of mine's brother had passed away, and I couldn't remember what he looked like. So I picked up a couple of my yearbooks from the hall outside where I have some shelves. And I glanced at it on the floor, and I picked it up, and I said, well, I'll just thumb through this while I'm waiting on a story. And I immediately, the first yearbook was from LaGrange, and I opened up the yearbook, and it opened up to this young man in the corner. And he was a senior at the time, and he was a year or so ahead of me. And I looked at him, and I thought, oh, that's Howard Smith. I said, boy, he was good looking. And then I thought, well, what was his girlfriend's name? Oh, yeah, Reese. She was beautiful, too. And then I thought, oh, my gosh, I wish he were still here. He died in Vietnam. He was Marine Lance Corporal, killed in Vietnam at the age of 22. And then I did a couple of pages over, and I saw Larry Kiesler. He was my ex-husband's best friend. They grew up together on the same street. They always played in the yard, and one of them wanted to play Army, and the other one wanted to play Cowboys and Indians. Larry usually got his way, and they played Army. So it was no surprise when he graduated from high school that he went straight into the Army while my ex-husband went on to college. We attended his funeral when Larry was 19 years old from being killed. He was killed in Vietnam also. Then as I sat back and I started thinking about all these people I knew, I had moved to Georgia from Tennessee when I was 15. And there was a young man by the name of Bobby Ray. And Bobby was tall, skinny, blonde-headed guy, a couple of years older than I was. And my last memory of Bobby Ray was in Tennessee, in Middle Tennessee. We would have these huge snowfalls. And we would all the kids would look for great hills to sled down. And Bobby had a great hill. The only problem with Bobby's hill was it was full of trees. And I had a real knack for sliding down his hill and running straight into a tree. It was a talent, trust me. I looked like the little guy on Laugh-In where you're driving and he just turns over this way. I would land in the snow, and my last memory of Bobby was he was at the top of the hill just laughing. And Bobby was a hospital corpsman in the Navy after college. And he went into Vietnam wanting to go. And he went to Vietnam and he was assigned to a Marine Corps unit. And the Marine Corps unit was attacked on a hill one day. And he was shot. But he went around to all the soldiers he saw that were injured and he treated them. As they were bombarded again, he was treating his last Marine. He threw his body over the Marine, and Bobby was killed, and the Marine lived. Bobby was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. He died at the age of 24. And if you go back to my old town in Tennessee, you will pass an elementary school, the David Robert Ray, Bobby Ray Elementary School. So I began to recall all the others who didn't make it home. And then I began to remember that that came home, even my brother who served in Vietnam, he was a lieutenant in the Navy. He was with the Navy for 6 years, was on the USS Pritchett. And he, talked about, he didn't talk about the war hardly at all, but he would tell a few stories. But I started thinking about the whole thing and about how we had just kind of forgotten, and these people came home and all the nastiness that went along with it. And I turned to my computer, and with God's help, he was out of the closet, and I wrote that story. It was published as the main Memorial Day story in many papers, not only in Georgia, but throughout the USA Today network, including an obscure place where they put it as their lead, and it was the lead Memorial Day story on that Sunday morning, including in a place called Kent, Ohio, home of Kent State. So perhaps those wounds that we talked about are just not quite healed. I began to receive responses from all over. I can't tell you, this is just one stack of responses that I finally just started printing out. I received a letter from a Marine Lieutenant Colonel from Australia, who a friend sent him the story, and he wrote me back, and he is writing a book. We developed this communication back and forth from Australia. He spent 33 years as a U.S. Marine. It's Lieutenant Colonel Tom W. Williams, Heart of a Marine, The Crucible of Fire. This book will be out probably later this year or the first of next year, and it's about experiences in his career, and they're quite remarkable. These are just snippets that he was very dear to send me. But my favorite responses were from some of you guys out there. I don't know if some of you are sitting there today. I had many. I just pulled a couple of them I wanted to read to kind of tell the whole story. One of them, this is just one little snippet out of their little letters that they wrote me. Thank you from the bottom of my combat boots. When I read that, I started laughing. And because he put exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, and then he put heart in parentheses, like I didn't quite understand that, but I did. I lost some very dear friends over there, and I was blessed to escort the remains of my best friend home to Georgia in 1967. Lynn, just read your piece about the Vietnam warriors. As a writer, columnist, and longtime news anchor, I wanted to drop you a line to say thank you for remembering these warriors who never got their welcome home. It was certainly a difficult time to serve, but we did our best. Yes, the return home was not pleasant. I think I did not put on my uniform again or talk about it for many years. That one still makes me cry. The last one I'm going to read goes back to the quote. Thank you for your article, Salute the Vietnam Warriors. Your observations were spot on. Surprisingly, what helped me was your quote at the end. We lost a lot of good men while I was there, and I'm finally able to pay my respects to them. I was in the 1st Cavalry and still have trouble rectifying what happened there. Thank you. And that quote was, it is foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived. General George S. Patton, Jr. I'm going to add to General Patton's quote. He can't put me, I don't think he's here, he can't put me in military prison. We should thank God that such men and women were willing to serve their country. We should thank God that such warriors who survived are here to tell their story. My brother, Lieutenant John Walker, served in Vietnam on the USS Destroyer and the Pritchett. At age 52, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. What he did in the next 3 years that he lived made me think a lot about how he felt about his time in Vietnam. For the 3 years that he lived and was able to move in those 3 years, I don't think he ever didn't go to the VFW. He felt comfortable being among his comrades. And he spent more time in those last months of his life there than anywhere else. He also wanted to get a reunion of his shipmates. They met in Missouri before my brother was too ill. They met, and he found that a lot of his commanding officers and a lot of the people in his crew had died of aggressive cancers before the age of 50, some as early as 30. So he was an engineer and very talented young man and very smart. And he wrote his congressman because he thought it was jet fuel that was the carcinogen that caused these disasters. But it could have been asbestos that was in a lot of the old ships that had been recommissioned. It could have been Agent Orange, but they found out after he died that yes, jet fuel was some of the carcinogen that caused some of these disasters in the Navy. So, but I know for a fact that old soldiers never die. They're just up in heaven going to meetings. And they're going to meetings, and they got meetings with their buddies from World War I and uncles and grandfathers from World War II, and they're all there and they're having a big old blast. And the difference is they don't cry and they don't get upset and they don't age and they look the same as Howard did in the annual. So they're there together. And I know for a fact, because I had something very interesting happen, and it involved my brother and another young soldier. And I'm going to explain how it was, but let me assure you, old soldiers never die. About 5 years ago, in 2005, I remarried, and my husband and I bought a house together. And I was working full time, my kids were grown. And when we bought the house, he made a statement to me one day, honey, you need to get some help cleaning this house. Like every 2 weeks or so, because you're working really hard. Well, that took me about 2 seconds to get on the phone. I wanted to get on there fast enough so he wouldn't change his mind. So I found a young lady that had come from Poland. Her name is Violet. She was very young, newly married, no children, spoke perfect English, just a delightful girl. That was in 2005. And she's been with me ever since. Now, Violet has a house bigger than I do now, has 3 children, and doesn't need to work with me at all. She has a big job, but she still comes here every 2 weeks, bless her heart. She's like family, and I'll tell you why. So about 4 or 5 years after we moved into this house, my husband had a lot of artwork. A lot of it was women. I know you all find that hard to believe, but yes, he did. And they were all beautiful, all great, gorgeous paintings. And they were just scattered around the house. And because I was a designer, we had this wall in our dining room that's a vaulted wall that looked plain. And I said, David, we should make a gallery out of this wall and put all this wonderful art that kind of goes together in a grouping on this wall. He said, are you sure? I go, people pay me money to give me my advice. I'm sure. So we started hanging and putting it all up on the wall, except there was a little 2-foot section to the left of a door that really was too narrow to really put a good piece of art. And I'm thinking, what are we going to do there? It needs something. I immediately knew. And I said, wait a minute, I've got it. And I ran upstairs and I pulled my brother's Vietnamese doll out that he had sent me in 1965. That doll had never had a place to be displayed. She was kind of fragile. I didn't want her. You can see her right here. There she is. She is a beautiful little thing. And she was just in a drawer with her clothes on. I lost her little hat, lost her little stamp. Her shoes were still there. And I had my POW bracelet wrapped around her. Now, the POW bracelet, I got just as a random, you would write California. They would send you for $3 a Vietnam POW MIA bracelet. You wore it until you found your soldier, and if he came home or if he was found, you broke it. My soldier was Major Robert Dysakowski, sent to me by random from California. I wore the bracelet so long, it took the hair off my arms. And when I delivered my 3rd child, they made me take it off. And I put it around that doll's waist, where it has been since 1970. And the doll and the bracelet moved just like that over the various moves and the various lives I've lived in all these years. So I got her and I said, I'm going to go get her framed. I'm going to put her in the shadow box. I'm going to get her framed. And when I did, I had museum glass put on it so that you could read the soldier's name, not have any trouble seeing the doll. I never did tell my husband how much that cost, but he doesn't need to know that kind of thing. We hung it. It was perfect. A few days later, Violet comes in the house. and I'm getting ready for work in the back of the house. And I hear her all of a sudden saying, Miss Lynn, Lynn. And I knew she had fallen. So I ran as fast as I could to the front of the house. And she's standing in there in the dining room, looking at the wall with the feather duster above her head. And she's just staring at the Vietnam doll. And I said, oh, Violet. I said, that's a doll from Vietnam. And I started telling her the story about the bracelet, because Violet wasn't even born in 1966. I mean, she's young enough to be my daughter. And so I said, and I'm explaining, in her mouth, it's just, her eyes got bigger and her mouth just flew open. And I said, my major, Robert Dysakowski, was never found. I looked for him several times. I've never been able to find him. So I imagine he's still missing in action. And she shook her head and she said, no. And I go, no. And she goes, no. And I said, well, Violet, what are you saying? She keeps pointing to his bracelet and she says, he was found around 2000. His plane was shot down in North Vietnam. They found fragments of bone. It was sent back to New York. He was sent back to New York. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And I said, Violet, why do you know this? You're from Poland and you came to Georgia. What do you know about this? She says, I know. He is my husband's great uncle. So you're talking about from Poland to New York, to Poland, to Georgia, to my dining room. And the odd part about it is my brother and Robert Dysakowski served together in Vietnam at the same time and did not know each other. And if you'll pull up the picture of the two gentlemen, I think it's on you'll see there's Robert and there's my brother. And if you will see that Robert Dysakowski was found, I never knew it, would have never known it. When I was standing there, Violet and I looked at each other, tears brimming or going down my face. And I looked at her and I said, old soldiers really don't die. They just want their stories told. They want their stories told. And so I knew these two guys were in my dining room together. I immediately went upstairs and I wrote a story called Old Soldiers Never Die. It went across the country. It was in Guidepost magazine. It's in the first book I wrote. So, and then again, it happened again this year with the salute to the Vietnam warriors. So let me assure you, I noticed that you've got a book coming out of stories, you send them in. And I would suggest that book go a little bit further than it needs to go. It should be on every shelf, and it should be, if you go at the USO, put it on the tables at the USO, sell that book. The stories need to be told. Old soldiers never die. They live on to tell their stories so that those who live understand the meaning of service, valor, and commitment. God bless you all. Thank you for your service. And I'm so glad that God gave you that extra dose of courage. Thank you so much.
Lynn, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Just perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you again for that great article. And I'm going to be mailing you a copy of that book that Bob showed, and you did a great commercial for motivating us to do that. So thanks again. You're a really special lady.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Y'all are special, very special. And it's been quite an honor to be asked to speak to all of you. It was wonderful, the first one that I went to, and this one's great too, even though I wish it could have been in person, but we have to do what we have to do to help everybody, I think. So This is great. And thank you again.
Thanks, Lynn.
By the way, one more thing, Skip. This story is going into my new book, The Vietnam Story, and y'all need to look for the Veterans Day story this year, wherever you are, because it's going to be about all of you guys. So just FYI, just letting you know that, okay?
Thanks, Lynn.
Hey, Skip, Dave Bockel has his hand up.
Yeah, David.
Lynn, are you familiar with the story of Lieutenant Michael Blassie?
I don't think so.
His sister Pat, retired Air Force colonel, used to be stationed here. Remains were buried in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for Vietnam.
Oh, yeah, seemed like I do know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I heard her speak last week about what the family went through to get those remains properly identified.
Right.
It was quite a story, and one worth telling. And Sister Pat, who was stationed here, gave the presentation, and it was a wonderful presentation, and it was done to the Honorary Commanders Association of the Cobb Chamber of Commerce. So if you have any interest in following up on that to get the details of how they got those remains identified and properly interred, it's a great story. Pat did a wonderful job.
Good. I've gotten her name down. I got it. I think somebody else had mentioned that to me before too. Thank you.